There we are. So right now in the assignment we can log in. No, I have PO. Right, and this is this information is being stored permanently in a database. Now, notice that one of the things that we have in this URL is you'll notice that we have been following the pattern that the state of the application is entirely defined by the URL. Okay, and that's a good thing. Ideally, I should be able to either bookmark this URL or perhaps even copy this URL and send it over to someone. And the state of the application is entirely determined by the URL. So if I grab this and somebody using Safari or somewhere else across the world, and they paste the same URL, they should see exactly what I see. Okay, so the URL entirely defines what I should see, and this is obvious when it's a static application. Yes, if you give me a URL to an HTML document, it's always going to look the same, right? Because it's obviously static. But it becomes it's not trivial when the application is entirely dynamic. Just imagine Amazon. If you go to an Amazon web page, that's entirely dynamic, right? It's every time you go to this page, it needs to calculate the page. It needs to go do a query in a database for depending on who's logged in, your favorite things, and runs all sort of analytics depending on your history. What should you see? Yes. So that page is entirely dynamic. But as a user, my expectation is that the URL, if I grab this and I send it to someone or bookmark it, if I click on it at a later time, I should see exactly the same thing that I saw earlier, right? And again, if this were a static page, well, that would be obvious. But if being dynamic, we need to be able to somehow encode in the URL everything we ever need to be able to reconstitute the page at a later time. Okay, and we certainly are doing that, right? We're capturing the ID of the user. Later on, if we navigate to a website, we capture the ID of the website, then the ID of the page, and then the ID of a widget. Correctly, right? We are capturing everything we need on the URL, and this is a good thing. What is not so great is this, that we are also capturing the state of the user, right? That we are encoding here the currently logged in user, and typically we want to hide that from our URLs. Instead of having the client remember anything about the user, those things should be implied depending on the session that I have entered here. Instead of the client maintaining any information about the user information is should only really be maintained on the server side, right? We should only display maybe identifiable information to the actual user. That they should not be able to share this in the URL and somebody try to either steal our identity in some other way. Okay, so we're gonna start moving certain things here, in particular the user identification here. This should be instead of being encoded as part of the URL, instead we're going to imply it from a running session, meaning somebody's going to log in, and it's going to be the server's responsibility to remember who you are. It will not be the responsibility of the browser to remember who you are. Right now it is, right? Notice that the server, at no time is the server remembering anything. You see that? There's no need for the server to remember anything. We are always providing enough information from the client side for the server to be able to reconstitute this page. Make sense? The server, and we call those types of application, we call them stateless applications, right? The server currently is a stateless application, meaning it doesn't remember anything about any one particular person, right? The state is always maintained on the client. The URL is maintaining the state of the application. Make sense? And stateless applications are great because they scale very very well. Okay, if the server doesn't need to remember anything, it always reconstitutes the state from the state which is maintained on the client, right? Meaning it can have a very low footprint, right? Doesn't need huge RAM. It doesn't need to be particularly powerful, right? But if we start asking the server to remember things about a particular person, right? Then we would need the server to be able to remember things about us, right? Say I log in, and it needs to remember, oh, this person is logged in, right? Maybe I need to remember some information about you, and that's okay if it's one person or a few dozen folks, maybe even a couple hundred. But when you're talking about thousands, and hundreds of thousands of people, then certainly servers having to remember so many things about so many people in RAM, right? You're now the footprint of your server needs to grow, proportional to the number of users that are going to be concurrently logged in. Make sense, right? Instead, if it doesn't have to remember anything, then it'll treat every query as an individual query. It'll go, fulfill it, and then just send it back. It'll come in, fulfill, and then send it back. It doesn't have to. It can have a very small footprint. So we say that stateless applications are more scalable than stateful applications, right? In general, right? And we only want to maintain state when absolutely necessary. And security, user security, and profile security is definitely something worth maintaining state for. Okay. So what we're going to do is that we're going to move everything that has to do about a user identity. We're going to move it over to the server as opposed to leaving it here on the client side. Make sense? All right, so first we'll need to learn how would a server remember anything, right? One way is that we've shown this already. We could just have objects instantiated on the server, correct? We show that in our, what is the second assignment, was it? I forget, where we created web services and we created arrays of objects in there, correct? And those objects lived throughout the lifespan of the server. Every time it booted, it instantiated these objects and they were kept around as long as the server was running. Yes? So we could create some mechanism that when you log in, we store somehow your username in an array, and we keep track of you by maybe providing a cookie, and every time you came back with the same cookie, we would know it was still you, right? And there was no need for you to provide user ID anymore, right? We would keep track of your username. But that would be a very primitive way of doing it. There are libraries that are specifically designed to handle this, right? And we'll talk about this today, right? How to maintain state and how to secure an application, right? So let's talk about session management and the technology that is needed to do that, all right? Let's do that next.